Hi, Misha here, and this is my second episode, kind of taking a closer look at the Starfleet ships from Discovery. And I'm kind of doing 2 or 3 at a time that are similar size, role, whatever. And the first time we looked at the Walker class and the Shepherd class, which were light cruisers. And now we're going to look at what could be described as frigates, support ships, things of that nature. So here we have the USS Clark of the Malachowski class. And then we have kind of a similar concept, the USS Edison of the Hoover class. And then we have this thing. Officially, it's just called a tug, but it seems to have been decided to be the Helios class and the USS Zimmerman. And if it looks similar, that's because in grand fine tradition of all Star Trek tugs, it is a kit bash. But we'll get to it. So what do we know about the Malachowski class and the USS Clark Hill? I'm not going to redo that. Oh, well. Not much. Well, the Walker class, and since it was kind of designed as a potential version of it, the Shepherd class, they were meant to be hero ships, pretty prominently seen. This ship, though, was designed always to be a background ship, a support ship, just kind of hang-about type. So not a whole lot was put into it. I'm not going to say they were lazy, of course not. But, yeah, it wasn't terribly fleshed out. We do know, of course, according to John Eves, that this is named after Nicole Malachowski. I'm going to start this shit over now. Why not? The USS Clark of the Malachowski class. What do we know about this? Not a lot, and that's okay. The last ships we looked at, the Walker and the Shepherd, well, the Shepherd ended up being a secondary ship, but it was designed as a potential Shinzo. So it was pretty well fleshed out, and of course the Shinzo was, because it's been a pretty major ship. But this vessel and class was designed from the outset to be a background ship, a support ship, just something to flesh out the fleet. Now, John Eves does tell us it was named in honor of Nicole Malachowski, who was the first female Thunderbirds pilot. That's a matter of record. Pretty much all of these are named after NASA pilots or astronauts, some military pilots too, but mostly that. And its inspirations are pretty clear. We don't really know a crew, a deck count. We're given a length of 277 meters, which is in keeping somewhat. But if we're going to kind of divide this by 2/3, like I've been doing, that gets us to just under 185 meters, which actually for a support ship really works out just fine. And it kind of goes along with the scaling of the components we see here. Pretty traditional bridge, kind of a more elongated style here. And we have what I kind of think of as the square Discovery era nacelles, whereas the TMP square nacelles were square, taller in the vertical, more narrow in the horizontal. These are the reverse. They are wider than they all are tall. And we've got struts connecting them. Pretty simple back. And there have you. On the underside, we have a kind of an interesting feature. There's a bit of a skinny, wide deflector dish that to me is very reminiscent of the NX class and others from that era. But instead of being on the edge of the saucer, it's kind of pushed to the middle. There's a bit of a drive section behind here at the step down. And then, again, here are our pylons. Simple, basic. Yeah. Engines in the back. 2 of these were at the Battle of the Binary Stars. The Clark here was an early participant. It was one of the first to show up after the Shinzo's call. Another one, the USS Sioux, would also show up. Unfortunately, the Clark here would not last long. It was one of the first victims of the Klingons. The Sioux was damaged, but I'm not sure. It may have survived. One of the fortunate few. But while obviously this had combat abilities, it was not a combat ship, but it was there at the ad hoc fleet alongside several other Federation ships, including the next one. The USS Edison of the Hoover class. No, this wasn't named after the vacuum. It also was not named after J. Edgar Hoover or the Hoover Dam. No, it was named for Bob Hoover, World War II pilot and POW that escaped Nazi captivity from World War II. Keep in mind that Gene Roddenberry also flew in World War II, so he would probably approve of honoring one of his fellow servicemen. And he would go on, Bob Hoover that is, not necessarily Gene Roddenberry, although Gene did fly commercially in the 40s for a bit before becoming a police officer, but I digress. Bob would go on to be a pretty well-renowned test pilot as well in that great era, kind of pioneered by Chuck Yeager. And this is obviously of a very similar plan, but it is a larger ship overall, with more internal volume. In the Eagle Moss magazine, it gives a length of about 356 meters. If we do the 2/3 thing, that gets us to about 237 meters, which seems very good. It still makes it a little smaller. Actually, it makes it right about the same length as the Miranda, which, hard to avoid the comparison there. So the size, it really does fit. And it's about all we know. Who was it named after? Which Edison? Some say Thomas Edison, but I like to think it was named after Captain Edison from the Earth Romulan Wars, the Mako, the guy from Star Trek Beyond. Seems more fitting, more interesting that way. And there are at least 3 other versions of this ship, or sister ships of this we see throughout the series. 2 of these were at the Battle of the Binary Stars, and the Edison did not make it out. She were destroyed. But really don't know a whole lot about it, because again, it's just a background ship, but kind of in a grand Star Trek tradition and layout. Taking this one off the stand, has kind of an interesting layout. It's like a cut-off teardrop. Definitely has the saucer. Has kind of an interesting bridge texture. The back. And then the underside actually has quite a bit going on. It says squatter nacelles with different kind of ends. And it has a true drive section here. And there's a kind of a pylon system not dissimilar to the Walker. And then it has the 2-pronged deflector dish that we see on the Walker and many others from this era. Quite an interesting underside to this little guy here. But yeah, the kind of the two strut system definitely reminds me of the Shenzhou. But we do not know a lot about it. But at either 356 or 237 meters long, with a lot of that being the actual saucer, a lot of times the links on these are extended because of the nacelles, but not with this guy. That probably would have a decent amount of internal volume, making it pretty darn versatile. I would say this could be considered a medium cruiser without difficulty, as the Miranda would be later on. And then we get to our third entry today. Well, this is the Starfleet Tug, and we've seen tugs throughout time. There was the Ptolemy class, although that was not officially full canon. You know, it was in, I actually had a miniature of it as a kid, so that was a tug of sorts. It carried containers, at least. And then in the movies, we had those little tug craft that operated around space dock. And then in Next Generation, we had a few more like that. Deep Space Nine gave us the very interesting blocky tug with the pincers. And then, of course, Picard most recently gave us the Wallenberg class, which can be considered a tug. And all of those, or at least the vast majority, are kit bashes, which honestly makes kit bashing a fine tradition of tugs. As you can tell, the saucer here in main section is from the Malachowski class, but the engines, the nacelles, are from the Hoover. And then it does have kind of a strut system underneath that is reminiscent of the Walker. And then it does have this kind of pad in the back that reminds me a little bit of the Wallenberg. We don't know much. We see two of these hauling the Constitution class Enterprise at the beginning of season 2. So obviously it takes two of them with tractor beams to haul that size of a ship. It is smaller. Officially, it's a little over 240 meters. Again, with my adjustments, that makes it a little over 160, which actually fits in very well with pre-existing tugs that we've had. We don't know a crew. Probably pretty highly automated with a lot of space inside to take on board crew from a disabled ship if needs be. You would imagine it would have some kind of medical facilities and also engineering repair facilities. Obviously, it's warp capable. We don't know much. In fact, the name USS Zimmerman was applied by everyone's favorite Kurtzman for Eagle Moss. So it's official, but not on screen. And I'm not even sure where the Helios class designator came from, but that's what we've got, and it works fine. I like it just fine. And this is actually the most recent ship I got in. Off the stand, actually of all three of these, this one probably fits its stand the best, but none of them are terrible. The top looks exactly like you'd expect on the saucer, with the nacelles from the other hanging out the back. And the underside is much the same. We have the same Enterprise style deflector in the front, and then we have this pad in the back for work. It's the major difference. And then you get to the thing about scaling. If we believe that the saucer is the same size as from the Malachowski class, then we have oversized nacelles. If we believe the nacelles are the same size from the Hoover class, then we have an undersized saucer. I would tend to go with that interpretation. It seems like it'd probably be a little easier to use a kind of a generic nacelle subassembly. No reason to really scale it up or down, but then scale down a saucer as needed. On the other hand, you could argue that they scaled up the nacelles for additional tugging towing power. I'm not sure that's how warp really works, but you know what? Again, these tugs are always kit bashes. They never make complete sense. I mean, for the love of God, the one from Deep Space Nine had part of a runabout and part of a Romulan warbird. The nacelles were from a Romulan warbird. And then it was basically a brick. And there was another one from Next Generation where it was made from a broken off GoBot robot foot. Yeah, okay. These haven't always received the most love. And I actually say, of the tugs we've received, maybe outside of, like, say, the Wallenberg, this one has gotten the most. And it's been proposed that maybe they took older ships and retrofitted them into tugs. That's also possible. The only really bad thing about it, it fits fine with the other ships here, but then it did appear in the Children of Mars short for Picard. Now, that was just a short, so probably had a budget of like $3 and a ham sandwich. So they reused this asset for that. Yeah, not a great call. Then again, you know, that was 150 years later. It's not a lot older than the Miranda or Excelsior or Oberth, and we see those around. It is what it is. It's Star Trek. Ships can last for a very long time. So that's our ships today. But now, let's do a little comparison and headcanoning and try to fit them in, if that makes sense. So, connections with other canon. And the two pretty obvious ones. Well, okay. I didn't grab the Miranda this time, mostly because this one was towards the front of the shelf. This is the Soyuz class. But I like the episode and I like the design. Plus it has kind of the extension on the back of the saucer that is reminiscent of the Hoover there. But, yeah, I think that, pretty clear. Having underslung nacelles hanging out in the back, having a saucer, being modular and all that. This would be a light cruiser, same size, and yeah, it's a very straightforward thing. And then moving forward, what most of us all consider to be the Miranda class's replacement, we have the Nebula. And this actually is a really good ringer for the Hoover, complete with the deflector being where it's at, the small star drive section, and the shorter nacelles being tucked up in under. This is the Phoenix variant with the AWACS pod. One kind of interesting thing, the Malachowski class here has a pretty standard, if I can find it where I'm at, the whole blind thing, guys, has a saucer that comes out and kind of comes in and tapers down and back, very TOS, TMP style. The Hoover, though, has a saucer that comes out and then goes forward with a kind of convex edge. This is very much like we see on the Ambassador and is reminiscent of what we see on later TNG era ships where the saucer does have this gentle slope going forward. I just found it kind of a little interesting. Also, while this doesn't have a pod in the back, it does have these fins here and kind of this section, almost like where a pod could be attached. Not saying it is, but yeah. I mean, if one of these had a pod, a roll bar, it wouldn't look too out of place. Now, this does look like a Nebula, and I think it does look like an earlier version of a Nebula. Certainly not later. And This does look like a Miranda variant, although the nacelles and pylons stick out, and it's a thinner design. So to me, this actually resembles another ship that may not be at first as apparent. A fan favorite, the Centaur class, or if you want to be very exact, type. The moment I beheld the Clark over here, this came to mind. We have long nacelles sticking out back. We have pylons going out and angled back. Small section here. We even have kind of a deflector dish system on the underside, although this is more of a potted system. But pretty similar to what we see here. The way that kind of comes down. I don't know. It does remind me of this here. And this is a Excelsior era ship. And it is a kit bash, but a very well executed one. They didn't go too crazy. Heck, it even has little kind of fin looking things. They're actually lights, but even that's, yeah, I see a lot of similarities. I could see this being a future replacement for this. What do you think? And of course, we're talking about these two. What about our tug here? What about kit bashes? Well, you know, it is what it is. And as far as kit bashes go, it's a pretty good one. Don't believe me? Behold the nightmare. The Curry class, Curry type. Yeah, I think when we think of kit bashes, this is at the top of the list for not great ones. That and the Jaeger, which is the Intrepid Maquis Raider mashup. This is a Constitution or Miranda mashup with an Excelsior, and in good fine tradition, things are out of scale. The nacelles are totally out of scale with the drive and especially the saucer. Heck, I could even believe this being a tug. We never really knew what it did. And this is from Deep Space Nine. It has the deflector kind of in the same thing. So yeah, I would definitely rate the Helios as a more successful kit bash than this thing. So, and this is from probably the best Star Trek series of all, Deep Space Nine. So that's kind of going forward. In my last video, I looked a lot backwards towards the Enterprise era. Unfortunately, there's not a lot for me to grasp onto. Not a lot of direct comparisons, but I did kind of find one. Check it out. The USS Franklin, which was commanded by Captain Edison. So it all comes together. Don't see it? I admit this is a bit of a stretch, but this was a smaller ship, about 130 meters at a time when the NX was about 230 meters. Much smaller crew, a few dozen at most, compared to the NX's over 80, and only 3 to 5 decks at most. But it was a good cargo ship, a good sturdy ship, and kind of seemed like it would feel the same role. And if you do this, now it starts to look more like either the Hoover or the Malachowski class. We could just say this is before they decided to sling the nacelles down. And I would imagine the big reason is this thing was designed to not only fly in an atmosphere, which the other ships could do, this could land, and this was really used before transporters were approved for biologics, so it had to land to offload its cargo and crew. So having the nacelles up made a lot more sense. Again, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but I wanted to present something from the previous era, and I think it does fit. Everything else, I think this is probably the best Starfleet ship from the whole JJ experience. The nacelles are a little unusual, but they work. And I kind of like the connection to Captain Edison. And this would be considered prime timeline and still canon in Discovery. So, yeah, it works. I don't know. I just wanted to present something to it. I have this weird habit of kind of liking secondary background support ships more. And that's what these are. It could be surveyor ships, patrol ships, supply ships. The Helios is classified as a tug, but also a support ship. And, just kind of workaday ships. Maybe they're cheaper and easier to produce. They require fewer crew. Not everything can be a Constitution. Not everything can be the bleeding edge of technology. That's why most modern navies are made up of cruisers and destroyers. In the past, they weren't all ships of the line. In fact, most were frigates and corvettes and what have you. Lots of reasons for that. So these would have been the types of ships that were throughout the Federation. As we know, at least in the beginning, Constitutions were quite rare, with only 12 originally made, and they were designed rather specifically for long duration, long range exploration missions. These would not have been. Totally different kind of role and pattern. But I think that's enough for today. Appreciate you hanging out and tuning in and kind of listening to me ramble on about Discovery ships that may be of only limited interest to a lot of people. But they are interesting to me because this is the first time I've effectively seen these ships. And that's always fun one way or the other. Even if you sometimes just go, what the hell? Sometimes you go, that's kind of cool. And yeah, I like these just fine. I definitely like the Clark over here a little better than the Edison, but I don't hate the Edison. I think it's a good proto-Nebula type. I think it actually looks the part pretty okay. The nacelles, yeah, but I do like the deflector. And the tug's the tug. It's kind of neat. Just to have a nice support ship, work ship. I'm sure Chief O'Brien would be right at home on it. With that, appreciate you tuning in. If you could, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, please do comment. Happy to have any kind of discussions below. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.